Shavua Tov, everyone. Bezat Hashem, tonight we're going to review the Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin that we learned this past week, which is Daf Yud, Yud Aleph, and Yud Bet. A lot to get through. And Bezat Hashem, we're going to have 4 sections in today's review. And we are going to start on Yud Amud Aleph V'Amar Rava, about 5 lines. 5 lines from the top of the page. V'Amar Rava Ploni Baal Nara Ma'orasa. We're going to start. Our learning tonight should be, as always, as a zechut, a merit for Refuah Shleima for Yaakov ben Dinah. And we begin again on Yud Amud Aleph, the 5th line of the page, V'Amar Rava. Now, this was in the middle of a sugya where we left off last week, which was in the middle of the sugya where Rava was discussing the principle of Palginan Dibura. So let's jump right into it. V'Amar Rava, says Rava. Witnesses come into court and they say, Ploni Baal Nara HaMa'orasa. They say a certain person had relations with Na'ara HaMa'orasa. Na'ara is a certain stage in her development, 12 years old, who was Ma'orasa, she had already received Kiddushin. So now in saying this, they'll make him Chayav Mita, but they didn't identify who the girl is, so therefore they didn't make her forfeit any money. So therefore all really they were doing was making someone be Chayav Mita. They turned out to be Zomamin, V'hozmu, they became Zomamin. Ne'aragin ve'en mishalmin mamon, so they are killed because we give them what they were trying to inflict, but they don't pay money because they did not actually have the ability to cause her to forfeit her ketuvah because they weren't identifying her. But however, if they say Bitosho Ploni V'hozmu, if they say it was a specific girl, and then in doing so, they would have caused the forfeiture of money. V'hozme, they become zomamin. Ne'araginu mishalmin mamon. So then they're killed and they have to pay money. Mamon lazeh. So Rashi explains this. Since in Na'ara, the money of her ketuvah would go to her father, they would have caused the forfeiture of money to her father. Therefore, they have to pay money to her father. Unifashot lazeh. And also they would have caused both the girl and the person that they said had relations with her to be killed. So they also have to get killed because they're testifying about 2 different characters. So we don't apply the principle of Kamle B'Drab Minei. Amar Rava, Rava says a similar idea. Ploni Rava Ashor, somebody comes to court and he says, this certain person sodomized an ox. But again, they didn't say which ox it was. V'hozma, they became Zomamin. Ne'aragin ve'en mishalmin mamon. They're killed and they don't have to pay money. Again, because they would have caused him to be Chayav Mita. They would not have caused the loss of money because they didn't identify which ox it was. Shora shel Ploni, if they say that it was the ox of Ploni, so then again, they would have caused the person to die and the ox of the other person by identifying it to be killed, which is a loss of money. V'huzma, if they became Zomin, Ragin Mishalmin Mamon, they're killed and they have to pay. Mamon lazeh, they pay money for the potential loss of the ox to the owner of the ox. And Fashot lazeh, and they also have to be killed because they would have caused the individual who they testified about to be killed. So the Gemara says, Hatulamali, why do I need this second example about Ploni Ravat Ashor? Hanuach, it's the same as the previous example, where there's the identified or unidentified. It's the same idea in the case of Nara Ma'orasa. So the Gemara answers, Mishum Dekabai Ba'aya Aluya. The reason it's brought here is because Rava wanted to ask a shaila on that, a question. Debai Rava asked the question in relation to the second case, which is Ploni Rava Shori Mahu. What if he says, Ploni had relations with my ox? So now this brings us to a shaila. Mi amrina, do we say Adam karov etzel atzmo, that a person is considered close with himself, meaning he can't testify about himself because he's considered nogea, he's considered connected to himself. Ve'en Adam karov etzel mamono, but he's not considered close to his money. So in this testimony, he should be believed about the money, and his ox should be killed. Odilmor, perhaps we say, Odilma Amrina Adam Karov Etzel Mamono, or do we say just like he's considered a karov of himself, he's also considered connected to his money, and his ox should not be killed because we don't trust him about it. And the Rav Batar de Ba'aya, their Pashta, after he asked it, he resolved this question. Adam Karov Etzel Atzmov and Adam Karov Etzel Mamono. He is considered connected to himself, and he cannot be believed about himself, as we explained last week. But he is not considered connected to his money, and his ox would be killed because his testimony would be accepted. Let's move on to the next section. The Mishnah told us, a machloket, how many witnesses are required in an adjudication of a case that someone might be chayav malkot, lashes in court. So Tanna Kama said 3 judges, and Rabbi Yishmael, which we'll get to momentarily, said 23. So let's explain the Tanna Kama's opinion. Makot b'shlosha, minani mili. How does Tanna Kama know that a situation of makot is adjudicated by a court of 3? Amar Rav Huna Makra, Pasuk tells us in the Pasuk is in Kitetse when it talks about Malkot, it says Ushvatum. It says they will adjudicate. And that means Shnayim is referring to getting Malkot. So you see, you need two. V'ein Beit Din Shakul, you can't have an even court. So Mesifin Alein Od Echad, add one more, Arekan Shlosha, which is a total of 3. But the Gemara says if that's true, V'etzdiku Shnayim, the Pasuk also says, they shall make righteous, meaning they shall make one person in the debate, in the court case innocent. Virshiu, and they shall incriminate, which is also plural. So Shnayim, add another 2. So V'etzdiku is 2, Virshiu is 2, Harekan Shiva. So it should come out that if you have 2 plus 2 plus 2, it's 6. Ushvatum Virshiu V'etzdiku. And you can't have an even court, so it should be a total of 7 judges for Makot. So the Gemara answers no, because those words V'etzdiku and Irshiu is for a different drasha. That's required for a drasha of ula. Damar ula. Rem is leidim zomin min Torah minayin. Where do we know a hint to the idea of edim zomin in the Torah? So the Gemara says, wait a second. Rem is leidim zomin. What do you mean? Where do we have a hint for edim zomin? V'achtiv. The pasuk says kasher zamam. It says as they intended to do to someone else, they should receive back. It's mefurish. That's the parasha in Shoftim when it talks about edim zomin. It's mefurish. El rem is leidim zomin shalokin minayin. No, really, what Ula was asking was, how do we know that if you can't administer the punishment that the Edim Zomin were trying to inflict on the defendant, that the natural punishment will be Malkot? Tichtiv, as the Pasuk tells us, V'yitzdiku et hatzadik v'yirshiu et harasha. So the Pasuk says, literally it means the court will make innocent one party and incriminate the other. And then it says the person who's a criminal will get Malkot. So the Gemara says, Mishum de yitzdiku et hatzadik v'yirshiu et harasha v'haya im benakot harasha. It sounds like because the simple pshat in the Pasuk is, because the one was made innocent, that's why the defendant receives Malkot. But that doesn't make any sense. What does this person being innocent have to do with the person who's guilty to receive Malkot? So Ella, what's the pshat in the pasuk? Pshat's like this: Eidim she'ershiu et hatzadik. We're talking about before the pasuk. Witnesses testified and incriminated somebody who was righteous. V'atu eidei acharini v'yitzdiku et hatzadik d'mei kara. A second pair of witnesses came in and validated, made innocent the defendant, meaning you're not really guilty, you're really innocent. V'shavinu la'anach resha'im, and they made the first pair of witnesses who testified falsely into edim zomamin. Then, v'aya in binakot ta'asha, the pasuk says, in binakot ta'asha, because you can't give them the normal punishment of edim zomamin, whatever the case is, as Rashi brings, like where they testify somebody's a halal, for example, then they'll receive malkot. Asks the Gemara, why is that the source that they receive Malkot? The Pasuk tells us, there's a lo taseh in the Torah not to testify falsely about your friend, and we know the punishment for a lo taseh is Malkot. So asks the Gemara, why do you need a special Pasuk? You should just say, there is a lo taseh for this, so that's why you say you should receive Malkot. So the Gemara answers, because lotana is a lav, a prohibition that does not have an action associated with it. Testimony is just dibur, it's not an action. When you have a lotaseh in the Torah that doesn't have an action, it's not an action type of isur, there's no malkot associated with it, so therefore we need the other drasha, v'yitzdiku et hatzadik v'yirshiu et harasha. Now, Rabbi Yishmael argued, and he said you need a court of 23 to adjudicate cases of malkot. So Bishum Rabbi Yishmael amru be'asrim v'shlosha, you need a court of 23. Asks the Gemara, my time is Rabbi Yishmael, why does he say 23? So we have two shitot. Amar Abaye, Abaye is the first one. Abaye says Atir Rasha Rasha michayavei mitot. He has a gzera shava connection between malkot and chayavei mitot. K'tiv hacha, it says in Parashat Ki Tetzei about malkot, it says va'yayim binakot harasha. K'tiv hatam, and it says in Maaseh about someone who's chayav mita in court, asher hu rasha lamut. So it connects malkot with person being put to death in court. Ma la'alan be'esrim v'shlosha. Just as capital cases require 23 judges, afkan be'esrim v'shlosha, so too malkot needs to be adjudicated in a court of 23. Rav Amar Rav says a different answer. Malkot b'makom mita omedet. So he says an interesting chidush. Just like we know there's 4 types of deaths that are administered by the court, Malkot is considered also one of the deaths. Now it happens to be it's a death that doesn't actually kill, but it's like one of the deaths, and therefore naturally you need 23. Amar Rav Achabre de Rav Ravashi, the son of Rav asked Ravashi, if it's really considered a mita, so umden alamali, why do we need the court doctor to estimate how many malkot this person could receive instead of just giving the total 39? Give him malkot leimut, and if he dies, he dies. If it's really in place of death, so then let him get the full treatment, let him die. So Amar Le, so Rav Ashi responded, Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, "V'nikla achicha le'einecha." It says your brother will be demeaned or lowered in front of your eyes. So he's called your brother. Ki machet agave dechayim machet. So when you hit him, you have to hit on the back of a live person. Meaning it's emphasizing you can't have it that he's killed through the makot. It has to be that you're hitting a live person. The problem is if you give too many makot, so then you're eventually going to be hitting a dead person if he can't survive it. Ela adetanya, but the Gemara says if that's true, but the Braita says, Amdu lekabel esrim. If the court estimated he could receive 20 lashes, so we derive that he could only receive malkot in sets of 3, which means it has to be a divisible number of 3. The kamahen, and how much would he then receive? Tam Nisrei receives 18. Turning to Yidam Bet, but the Gemara says, if the kasha the Gemara asks is, why not give him 21? And when he dies in the 21st one, let him die in the 21st one. Because the way we're understanding Rav Ashi's answer previously is, yeah, you need to give malkot to a live person. It's true the 21st one will kill him, but you're giving it to him when he's alive, so he'll die after. So what's the problem? Give him 21. So Amar Lei, Rav Ashi responded, Amar Krono, because the pasuk says, "V'nikla achicha le'einecha," he has to be your brother after the fact. Achar shalaka achicha be'einecha v'leka. The problem would be is that then he's not your brother after because he's dead, meaning he's not alive anymore. He's not a live brother. So therefore, the pasuk is telling you he has to be alive after the fact. That's why you have to give him just the amount that he could receive without dying. And even though it is b'makom mita, still you wouldn't give him too many that would actually cause him to die. Okay, let's move on to the third section now about Ibur Chodesh. We had said in the Mishnah, Ibur HaChodesh Bishlosha, that when it comes to adding, literally Ibur Chodesh refers to making the emphatic announcement that this past month had been 30 days, a full month. So you need 3 judges for that type of determination. So the Gemara says, Chishuv lo katani. Mishnah does not say the calculation that goes into this decision about making Rosh Chodesh needs 3 judges. Kiddush lo katani. Also, it doesn't say sanctifying the new moon, which is accepting the witnesses, and saying mekudesh needs a court of 3. Ela ibor. Rather, it says just regarding ibor, meaning when you get together as a court and you say this past month had been full, that requires 3. So the Gemara's question that is, lo liktisham memela la'aber. Question is, the Gemara assumes that if you're not going to sanctify the 30th day as Rosh Chodesh, so then naturally you're sanctifying the 31st day. Once you sanctify the 31st day, the previous month had been 30 days. So why do you need a special announcement the previous month was full? By sanctifying the 31st day, that automatically makes the previous month maleh. So Abaye answers, we're going to have 4 explanations of the Mishnah. Tani Kiddush HaChodesh. No, really what the Mishnah meant to say was sanctification of the new month requires 3 judges, which means whether it's a 30-day month or a 31-day month, and then Rosh Chodesh is on the 30th day or the 31st day, 30th day or the 31st day, regardless, it's going to require a court of 3 to sanctify. That's the pshat in the Mishnah. Tani Nami Hachi, the Gemara says, we have a Braita that supports this. Kiddush HaChodesh v'ibur HaShana. Bishlosha divrei Meir. Meir says Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying the new moon, and Ibur Shana, intercalating the year, which we'll discuss in the final section, requires 3 divrei Meir. So this fits with Abaye's explanation that really the Mishnah meant to say Kiddush HaChodesh, not Ibur Chodesh. Amar Rava says that back to Abaye. Says Rava, Vaha Ibor Katani, but our Mishnah says Ibor. How can you put Kiddush in the Mishnah if it says Ibor? Elam Rava, so Rava says the second shot in the Mishnah. Kiddush b'yom Ibor b'shlosha. What it means in the Mishnah is, if you sanctify the Yom Ibor, which is the 30th day, meaning you're making the previous month 29 days, that requires a court of 3. Achar Ibor leka Kiddush. But if it's the next day, meaning the 31st day, which means the previous month had been maleh, so then you don't need a court of 3 to sanctify. Umani, and who's the author of our Mishnah? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadoki, the Tana Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Im lo nir ebizmano, if you don't see the new moon in its time, meaning it's already the 31st day, Ein mikachinoto, the court does not have to sanctify the new moon, Shekfar kitshu b'shamayim, because in heaven it was already sanctified, meaning it's a natural Rosh Chodesh, and that's the pshat in the Mishnah. When it says Ibur Chodesh b'shlosha, it means if you're sanctifying it on the day of the Ibor, the 30th day, you need 3. But beyond that, the 31st day, you don't, because Hashem already sanctified it naturally. Rav Nachman says a third answer. Kiddush achar ibur bishlosha. So he says the inverse of Rava. He says, if it's the day after the ibur, i.e. the 31st day, that requires a cord of 3. But b'yom ibur, on the 30th day, leka kiddush, you don't have to sanctify it. Umani plimo, this is plimo. The Tanya plimo omer, the author plimo says, bizmano and mikachinoto, on the 30th day, you do not have to sanctify it. Shalo bizmano, but if it's the 31st day, mikachinoto, the court would have to convene to sanctify. Rashi explains over here, because if it's the 31st day, we don't want people to think that it's not significant. Right? It's only really Rosh Chodesh on the 30th day. When it's the previous month was Chaser. We wanted to know that's also significant, so they would gather to be Mekadesh Chodesh in that situation. Ravashi is the fourth and final answer. Olam Chishuv Katani. Really, what the Mishnah meant to say was, when the court convenes to determine if the month is going to be, the prior month is Maler Chaser, it means that's what it means. Ibor means really Chishuv. That requires a cord of 3. Umay Ibor, why does he use the word Ibor? Chishuv the Ibor, it means the calculation of making it Maler Chaser. Since it wrote Ibor Shana in the Mishnah regarding the years, Tananami Ibor Chodesh had also taught the word Ibor Chodesh. So the Gemara says, based on this fourth answer of Ravashi, Chishuv Chodesh in, the calculation of the month requires the cord of 3, but Kiddush Chodesh lo. Ravashi seems to be saying that you don't need 3 to sanctify the new month, to declare Mekudesh. So Mani, who is this author? So this is Rabbi Eliezer, he did Tanya. Rabbi Eliezer says, Bein Bismano, Bein Shalo Bismano, whether it's being sanctified as the new month on the 30th day or the 31st day, and Mikachinoto, court does not have to sanctify. Shana like the pasuk tells us in Behar, when it talks about Yovel, it says V'kidashtem et shnata chamishim shana. They shall sanctify the 50th year, and the emphasis is that the 50th year of Yovel requires a special sanctification. Shanim atam mekadesh v'yatam mekadesh chodashim, that you don't have to sanctify the months, meaning it doesn't require a sanctification. It's determined by Hashem. That's not necessarily sanctified by the courts. Let's go ahead. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer b'Shloshan. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel argued in the Tanakama. He said, in order to do Ibor Shana, you need to start off with 3, you discuss it with 5, and then in conclusion you have 7. So the Gemara explains over here exactly what his opinion is. Tanya, Ketzah. So the Braita says, how is this done? So Amar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. You start off with 3 judges. You discuss it with 5. And it's concluded with 7. Now the Braita elaborates. If one person says, let's sit down and discuss if we should make a leap year, and 2 say we don't have to. So the 1 is nullified and you don't discuss it. Now, if one person says, 2 people say to convene to discuss this, one says it's not necessary, you add another 2. Now you have 5, and they discuss it. Now, if 2 people say we need a leap year, and 3 say we don't need a leap year, so then the 2 are nullified by the 3, and you would not make a leap year. But Shlosha Omrim Tzricha, if 3 say we do need a leap year, Shnaim Inat Tzricha, and 2 people say we don't. So Mosifin Alein Od Shnaim, you add another 2 to a total of 7. She'ena Minyan Pachot Me'asara, because you can't have the number to make a leap year less than 7. And then they declare it a leap year if they see that it's fit to have an extra month. He says the Gemara, 3, 5, and 7, these numbers, what do they correspond to? So there's machloket in the Amorayim. Umani Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. V'amir Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi v'chad de'imei uman Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmeni v'chad amar keneged Birkat Kohanim. So one says corresponds to the words in the 3 psukim of Birkat Kohanim, which is 3, 5, and 7. V'chad amar, the other one says Shlosha keneged Shomrei Asaf. 3 corresponds to the gatekeepers of the king. Chamisha meroi penei hamelech. 5 corresponds to the intimate people who would go in to see the king's face constantly. And Shiv'ar ro'ei pnei hamelech. And 7 corresponds to the officers who were able to go in only infrequently to see the king's face. Tanu Rav Yosef Hani Shlosha v'chamisha v'shiv'ah. What do these 3, 5, and 7 correspond to? Shlosha keneged Shomrei Asaf. 3 corresponds to the guards of the gates. Chamisha meroi pnei hamelech. Shiv'ar ro'ei pnei hamelech, exactly like we just said. Abai says to Rav Yosef, why didn't you explain this to us before, this beautiful chidush? So said back, I didn't know that you needed to know this. I thought you knew. Did you ever ask me and I didn't tell you? It means now that you're asking me, I'll be happy to explain this chidush to you. Let's move on. Now we're going to discuss further in this topic, this final section, the different reasons to intercalate the year or to not add the extra month. But really, this will take us till the end of the page, till the end of the sugya today, to the bottom of Yud Bet Amud Bet. So let's see. Zman nasi tzarich gedi siman. Tan Rabbanan ein mabrin et hashana ela, turning to Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. You could only make a leap year if you have the judges, the 7 judges we spoke about, who are appointed previously. They have to be pre-selected. There was a story of Rabbi Gamliel, was the Nasi. He told his attendant, go and wake the 7 people up early so that they could come and participate in determining if there should be a leap year. Rabbi Gamliel got up early, and he found that there were 8 people in the aliyah, in the attic, to discuss this. So Amar Miu she'ala l'shelo b'rshut. Who is the person that came here without permission? Yered, he should go down. So Amad Shmuel HaKatan got up. We're going to see this was a very special person, a humble person. But Amar, and he said, Aniu shaliti shelo b'rshut. I'm the one who came without permission. V'lo la'aber hashana aliti. I didn't come to be involved in making a leap year. But rather I came to learn halacha l'maaseh, how this is performed. So Amar Rabbi Gamliel said to Shmuel HaKatan, Shei b'ni shev, sit my son, sit, you could stay. Re'oyot kol hashanim kulan li'itaber al yadcha. All of the years are fitting to be intercalated through you because of your greatness. But the Chachamim said that you can only intercalate the year by the pre-selected judges. The Lo Shmuel HaKatan Hava, but the Gemara tells us really it was not Shmuel HaKatan who was unselected. It was somebody else. He did this to prevent the shame, so the other person shouldn't feel bad. Like we know a similar story. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was giving a drasha, and he smelled the smell of shum. Somebody had eaten garlic for lunch. Amar, he said, please, the one who ate garlic should leave. So the great Rabbi Chia was the primary student of Rabbi. He got up and left. Amdu kulan v'yatzu, so the rest of the students also left. Pashacha, the next morning, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, found Rabbi Chia. Amarle, he said to Rabbi Chia, you're the one who caused pain to my father. You ate garlic before the class. Rabbi Chia said, Lo te kazot b'Yisrael. No, this should never happen in Yisrael. It means I feel bad that happened to Rebbe, but it wasn't me. Rabbi Chia mehecha, but meaning the point he was saying was, I only did this to save that other student's shame, and when everyone walked out, so he didn't have to be embarrassed. Says the Gemara of Rabbi Chia mehecha gamirla. Where did Rabbi Chia learn this from? Rabbi Meir. So he learned this from a story with Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, the great Rabbi Meir, the Tana, he taught Breit Ma'asevi Isha Chatz. Rabbi Meir, there was a story in a Breita with Rabbi Meir. A certain woman, Sheba'ata lebeit midrasho Rabbi Meir. She walked into the yeshiva of Rabbi Meir. Amrullah, she said, Rabbi, Chad mikem kadsheni b'biyah. One of the people in the yeshiva had relations with me to marry me, which is an effective form of kiddushin, of marriage, but it's frowned upon. So Amad Rabbi Meir, v'katav la get kritut v'natan la. Rabbi Meir wrote her a get as if it was him, and he divorced her. Amdu katvu kulam v'natnu la. So everybody else also got up, so she was certainly divorced, and the fellow who had done something that was considered inappropriate was not ashamed. Rabbi Meir me'echa gamirla, where did Rabbi Meir learn this principle from? To prevent the shame of someone else. Mishmuel HaKatan, from the initial story of Shmuel HaKatan. Shmuel HaKatan me'echa gamirla. Where did Shmuel HaKatan learn this from? Mishchanya ben Yechiel, from the story of Shechanya ben Yechiel in the days of Ezra. The Chtiv, like it says in Ezra, Vaya'an Shechanya ben Yechiel mibnei Elam. We know when Ezra castigates the people that they married Nashim Nachriyot, non-Jewish women. So Shechanya ben Yechiel responded from Bnei Elam, Vayomer le'Ezra, and he said, Anachnu ma'alnu be'Elokeinu, v'noshev Nashim Nachriyot me'amei ha'aretz. We have married foreign women. Now, he didn't. He was a tzaddik. But he was doing this, V'ata yesh mikveh Yisrael azot. There is hope for the Jewish people on this. He wanted to not embarrass the fellows who had, showed, I'm going to do teshuvah, meaning, and everyone else would follow. Shechanya ben Yechiel me'echa gamarlan. Where did Shechanya ben Yechiel learn this idea from? Yoshua. So he learned it all the way back from Yoshua ben Nun. The Chtiv, like it says, after the story of the Jewish people falling in battle versus the Ayin, like 36 people died. Hashem says to Yoshua, get up. Why have you fallen on your face? Chata Yisrael, the Jews have sinned, which refers to how Achan took spoils of war from the city of Yerich when he wasn't supposed to, and that's why the Jews fell in battle. So Amar Lefanav, so Yeshua said to Hashem, Ribbona Shalom, mi chata, who is it that sinned? Tell me and we'll get rid of it. So Amar Hashem said, V'chi dilatorani lecha, am I a gossiper? Hatel gorela, go work it out. And there was a miraculous sort of lottery system. They figured it out, but Hashem didn't want to point it out to Hashem Achan directly. He gave Achan the opportunity to admit. Alternatively, maybe Shechanya learned it from Moshe Rabbeinu. It says, after Datan and Aviram went and gathered man when they were not supposed to, Ad ana me'antem, Hashem says, until when will you, plural, all refuse to listen to me? So he didn't point out Datan and Aviram, even though they were the ones that actually were the sinners. Tana Rabbanan says the Braita, Mishemetu Neviim Acharonim, when the last prophets died, which was Chagi Zechariah Malachi, Nistalku Ruach HaKodesh MiYisrael. There was no Ruach HaKodesh, divine direction like that, inspiration like it once was in the Jewish people. And even so, they used to use batkol, which is like a heavenly echo, a low level of Ruach HaKodesh. One time, the Chachamim were sitting in a place called Beit Goria in Yericho. And there was a heavenly voice from Shamayim that said, one of you is fitting that the Shekhinah should rest on you, but the generation is not on the level. So the Chachamim knew it was Hillel HaZaken. And when he died, they eulogized him. Hi Chassid, hi Anav, Talmido shel Ezra. What a Chassid, what an Anav, a humble person, student of Ezra. He was like Ezra. Shuv Pamachat, another time, they were in the attic of Yavne. And there was a similar type of batkol from heaven. There's someone here that should have the Shekhinah resting on him, but the generation is not on the level. Chachamim put their eyes and knew it was Shmuel HaKatan. And similarly, when he died, they said about him, Hi Chassid, Hi Anav, Talmido shel Hillel. He was a student of Hillel. He was like Hillel HaZaken. And even though he didn't have Ruach HaKodesh, he did have a bit of prophecy when he was passing away. And he said the following terrible predictions about the future. He said, Shimon v'Yishmael lechorva. Shimon and Yishmael are going to die, which was and ended up having Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon. They died in terrible ways under the Romans. The Chavroi l'ktala, and the friends, Rabbi Akiva, and Rashi says, Rabbi Hananya, were going to end up killed by the sword, but also in terrible ways. The Shar Amal Abiza and the rest of the nation will be taken as spoils. And terrible tragedies will befall the world. So we see that he had a bit of a nevuah at the end of his life, even though it was a very terrible nevuah, but it was nevuah. So this actually, Gemara finishes off, Al Yehuda ben Baba Bikshu Lomar Kain. They also wanted to say similar wonderful eulogies about the greatness of Yehuda ben Baba, who was killed by the Romans. But the time was grabbed, means they couldn't eulogize him. You don't give eulogies for people killed by the government because for multiple reasons, but therefore they couldn't say eulogies about him when he passed away. Tan Rabbanan says the Braita, back to the story at hand. You can only make a leap year if the Nasi is agreeable. There was a story that Rabbi Gamliel went to a certain officer in Syria to discuss some political matter. Vishal Lavo, and he was delaying coming. The Chachamim intercalated the year, added an extra month. Al Menat Sheyirtzeh Rabbi Gamliel, but based on the condition that Rabbi Gamliel the Nasi would agree. Rabbi Gamliel, when he came back, V'amar Ratzani, he said, I'm agreeable. Nimtzeit Shana Meuberet, the year was intercalated. Tan Rabbanan says the Braita, Ein Ma'birin Tashana El Im Kein Hayta Tzricha Mipnei Adrachim. The only reason you'd intercalate the year, these are the secondary reasons actually. You'll see on the next page what the primary reasons are. But you'd make a leap year if the ways, the paths, are still ruined, or the bridges, or the ovens they use for Korban Pesach are still ruined from the rains, or the Jews from diaspora, from Bavel, had started to travel, they're not going to get here by Pesach, they'll intercalate the year to make sure they can get there. Not because of snow or cold, means they'll travel through that anyway. And not because of Jews who had not yet left Bavel, that would not be sufficient reason to add an extra month. Tan Rabbanan says the Braita, you don't intercalate the year if the goats and sheep are young, because you could still use those for Korban Pesach. Nor because of the birds haven't started flying, because you can use doves, you can use Yonah for the korbanot of kinei yoledet, the different korbanot that were brought for women at this time of the year because they were traveling to the Beit HaMikdash. You can use certain birds even if they were very little. But you could use this as a secondary reason. If you have one of the primary reasons of the three we'll get to on the next page, that would be sufficient to intercalate the year with one of these. Ketzad, says the Gemara, what's an example of this? Rabbi Yanai Omer Mishum ben Gamliel. So Rabbi Yanai told over, Rabbi Gamliel sent a letter, who was the Nasi, the son of Rabbi Gamliel, and in his time he said the following. So he sent the message to the Jews saying, of Bavel, we're notifying you that the birds are immature, v'imraya da'arkin, and that the sheep are feeble, v'zimna da'abiva lo mata, and this is the key, and the ripening of the grain has not yet arrived, which is one of the reasons we'll see you would push off Pesach. V'shafart milta ba'anpai, and it is appropriate in my eyes, and I added 30 days. So we see he used one of the primary reasons, one of the secondary reasons to intercalate the year. Meitave asked the Gemara Kasha from a Braita. Here he said he added 30 days, but the Braita says, Kami Ibur Hashana Shloshim Yom. Tanakama says that the extra month is 30 days. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer Chodesh. Gamliel says it's 29. So it seems like he doesn't hold it's 30. So Merapapa, Ratzu Chodesh, Ratzu Shloshim Yom. Rav Shimon Gamliel holds you could either do 30 or 29. You have one or the other option. Tachazi Mai Ika Ben. Turning to the next page. Kifai kadmai li'invatani batrai. Come and see the difference between the early harsh ones and the later humble ones. Rabban Gamliel, who was known to be harsh, as we're about to see from the next Braita, he spoke in a more humble way. And Rav Shimon Gamliel, his son, who was known to be humble, spoke in a more haughty way. This is what appears good in front of me. The Tanya, like the Braita illustrates, Maaseh Rabban Gamliel Shayoshev al Gav Ma'aleh B'Har HaBayit. Rabban Gamliel, his father, was sitting on the Temple Mount. Vayeh Yochanan Sofer Allah Zomed Lefanav, and the Sofer Yochanan was sitting in front of him. V'shalosh igrot chatuchot lefanav munachot, and 3 pieces of parchment were in front of him. Amar lo sir, but Gamliel said like this: Tol igarta chada, take one of these parchments, v'chtov, and write the following: La'achana b'nei Galila ilah, la'achana b'nei Galila tata. For the upper Galilean Jews and lower Galilean Jews, shlomchon yaskeh, your peace should endure, should continue. Mahoda'in anachna lechon, we are informing you. Tizman biura mata la'afrosh ma'asrami ma'atana dezeta. The time has come to get rid of the ma'asrot of the olive vats, because the 4th or 7th year was approaching. Vitol igarta, which was before Pesach of the 4th year, and of the 7th year, they had to get rid of all their ma'asrot, because that was when biur, the shat biur, came along, so whatever was given to the Kohen, the Levi, etc. Vitol igarta chada, and take another piece of parchment, v'chtov la'achana b'nei deroma shlom chon yaske, and write to the brethren in the south, your peace should endure. We're informing you that the time to give the ma'asrot from your sheaths of grain has arrived. And take a third one. Write a message to the Jews who are in Bavel, in the diaspora, in Madai, the Medians, and all the Jews in exile, in diaspora. Shalom Chanyaski, your peace should endure la'alam forever. The birds and the sheep are feeble, are young. And in addition, as the primary reason is the ripening season has not yet arrived, the grain is not ripe. And it was appropriate in my eyes and my friend's eyes. So we're adding 30 days. So the Gemara says, you see, he spoke in a more humble way, adding his friends in with him in the decision, whereas Rav Shimon Gamliel said it personally. The Gemara answers, Dilma Batar Davrohi. Perhaps this was after he had been deposed and then put back, and he learned how to speak in a more humble way. Which Tosafot says is actually he was including Relaz ben Azariah in this decision because he was actually his running mate moving forward. Let's go on. Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita, Shlosha Dvarim Abrinat Hashana. Now these are the 3 primary reasons to make a leap year. Ala Aviv. So first of all, the ripening season has not yet arrived. And the Torah called it Chag Aviv. So if that's delayed, then you would also push off the year by adding an extra month. Val Perot Ilan, as well as Perot Ilan, the fruits of the trees, meaning if Shavuot, by the time Shavuot rolls around, the fruits of the trees, the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael, are not going to be ripe. They won't be able to bring them with them for Bikurim, for Shavuot. That's a problem. Valat Kufa, and also the seasons are out of whack, which means Pesach is not going to be in the spring, in Kufat Nisan, and Sukkot is not going to be in Kufat Tishrei in the autumn. So if you have 2 of these reasons, you'd make a leap year. And if you only had 1, you would not. If Aviv is one of the reasons, Hakol Smechin, everybody was happy. So Rashi explains the reason is because the issue would be is that you have to push off the consumption of the new grains until the Omer. But if the Aviv, anyways, the ripening is delayed, so they can't eat the new grains because there aren't new grains, so everybody was happy with that, was fine with that if they push it off for that reason. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer al Tkufa. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, he's arguing, and he says al Tkufa, based on the seasons. So the Gemara wonders, al Tkufa smechin, does he mean that they're happy if the Tkufa is pushed off, if it's one of the reasons to push off, which Rashi explains because then they won't get rained on when they're traveling for Sukkot, o al Tkufa me'abrin, or does he mean to say, as an independent reason, you'd push off the year, make an extra month if the Tkufot don't line up, because the Torah requires Pesach to be in the spring and Sukkot to be in the autumn. Gemara says, Teiku, it's not clear what his position is. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita. For 3 years, for 3 areas in Israel, you would make a leap year if those places, their fruits or their grains had not ripened properly. Yehuda ve'ever Yarden va'Galil. So Yehuda in the south, Ever Yarden in the east, and the Galil in the north. If 2 of them are struggling with this issue, so then you push off, you make a leap year. If it was just one, you would not make a leap year. Now, if Yehuda was one of them, everybody would be happy, because the Omer ideally came from Yehuda, because it was closest to Yerushalayim. And as Rashi explains, then the grains brought for the Omer could be Carmel, which means it could be ripe and tender as it's meant to be. So everybody was happy. It was pushed off for that, so they would have the proper ripe and full grains for the Korban Omer. The Imivrua begalil mu'beret. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita Ma'abrin Tashanim El Yehuda. The place that they would convene to intercalate the year was Yehuda. The Imivrua begalil, if they did it in Galil mu'beret, it's still effective. However, Heid Chananya ish ono imivrua begalil eina mu'beret. So this Chananya testified it would not be effective. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Breder Rishon ben Pazi. My time at the Chananya ish ono. Why does he say this? Amar Kra, because the pasuk tells us that the place of the Shechina, that will be where you do the Drisha. The Drisha is investigations, or in this case, the convening of courts. The place to convene for, also like we're saying, intercalating the year, is in the place of Hashem Shechina, which is in Yerushalayim, which is in the area of Yehuda. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita, you can only intercalate the year during the day. They would convene during the day. If they did it during the night, it's not effective. And similarly, you don't sanctify Rosh Chodesh unless it's day. If you did it during night, it's not considered sanctified. What's the source for this? It says in Tehillim Pe'alef, it says, it says, on the Kesel Yom Chagenu, you should be tokea, make a blast with a shofar. What is the month that the moon is not visible? The Chag, what is the month, the Yom Tov, that the moon is not visible? The Yom is the Rosh Hashanah. This refers to Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is the only Chag that falls out in the beginning of the month. And the pasuk tells us in that same context, it calls it a mishpat, just judgment. Just as judgment generally was done, it had to be done during the day. Also, Kiddush HaChodesh being referenced there because Rosh Hashanah was not just Yom Tov, it's also Rosh Chodesh, had to be done during the day. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita Ma'abrin Tashanah, turning to Bet Amud Aleph. B'shnei Ravon, you cannot intercalate the year during a year of famine because everybody wants to eat the new grains already, and if you push off the year, it's going to push off the Omer, which means you're going to have to wait to eat the new grains. Tanya the Braita says, Rabbi Omri brought a proof to this. It says in the story of Elisha in Malachim Bet, it talks about how a person brought Elisha the Navi food, and it says, V'ish bami ba'al shalisha, he came from the place of Shalisha, v'yaveh li'ish Elokim lechem bikurim, he brought new breads, Esrim lechem seori, made out of barley. This place is the quickest place of ripening of produce. And the only thing that had ripened was barley, because otherwise he would have brought him wheat, as that's more suitable for people. Shema tomar chiti, maybe he'll say it was wheat. Talmud lomar seorim, it says clearly it was barley. Shema tomar lifnei omer, now maybe he'll say he brought it before the omer, but really they were going to push off the year. Talmud lomar, tein la'am v'yochelu, it says Elisha tells this person, give the people so they should eat. Achar omer haya, this was clearly after the omer, so people could eat from the chadash. Amor me'ata, so you see clearly, since the ripening was late, they should have made a leap year. Why didn't he? Because it was a year of famine and people wanted to eat the new grains already, so they made sure Pesach was sooner than later. Everybody was running to the granaries. Tanur Rabbanan says the Braita Ma'abrin Tashanah lifnei Rosh Hashanah. You should not make a leap year before Tishrei, before Rosh Hashanah, because people will forget It's 6 months in advance, it's too early. If they did, it wouldn't be effective. If it's a pressured time because you might not have the court later, the Nasi later, so then they could do it right after Rosh Hashanah. With the only month that they add to is Adar. You make Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, not any other month. Eni asks the Gemara, can you not make it a leap year beforehand? They sent a coded message to Rava so that the government wouldn't realize what they're saying. Zug ba mereket. There was a pair of chachamim who came from the city of Reket, which is Tiberia. V'tafsu nesher, and they were grabbed by the eagle, which refers to Persian officers. Goyim. Uvyadam dvarim an aseh baluz, and in their hands was something that was made in luz. Umaynu, the Gemara interjects, what is that? Tchelet means tchelet was in their hands. The blue wool for tzitzit. B'schut harachamim u'v'schutam, in the merit of Hashem and in their merits, yatzu b'shalom, they were able to leave peacefully. Ba'amuse yereche nachshon bikshu lekfor netziv echad. Literally, it means the thighs of the officers of the thighs of Nachshon, which refers to the people of Yehuda, of Shevet Yehuda, wanted to establish a netziv echad, which means one officer, but in the context that we're learning, it means they wanted to make make a leap year. V'lo inichan adomi alaz, and the Romans did not allow it. But the people of gatherings gathered together, v'kavalo netziv echad, and they did establish that officer, i.e. they intercalated the year. B'yareach, in the month that Aaron had died, which means they gathered in Av to intercalate the year. Now Av is before Tishrei, so you see clearly they could gather before Tishrei to intercalate the year. Answers the Gemara, they're allowed to calculate it, but they're not allowed to reveal it to the people, because if they reveal it too early, people will forget by the time Adar rolls around. Asks the Gemara, where do we find that the word netziv refers to a month, or the extra month for that matter? Like it says, when it talks about Shlomo Melech's officers who would provide taxes to the king from the people, it says, Shlomo, Shnei Masar Netzivim, he had 12 officers, I'll call Yisrael over the Jewish people, and everyone had a job to bring the taxes to the king 1 month a year. But the Pasuk says, it says one officer, so was it 12 or was it one? That there were 12 who would gather the taxes, they'd give it to the 13th one who was on top of all of them, who would deliver it to Shlomo. The other Shita says, that there was a 13th officer for the 13th month, if there was a leap year. So from here we see the word netziv is associated with that 13th month. That was why they used it as the coded description in the letter. Tan Rabbanan says the you cannot make a leap year this year to prevent an issue in the next year, rather make a leap year next year. Nor can you make 3 years leap years in a row, because it'll eventually push Pesach into the summer, which is wrong. Rabbi Shimon argues, he says, because there was a story with Rabbi Akiva, when he was taken to jail by the Romans, and it seems like he intercalated 3 years, one after the other. So they said back, Misham Raya, that's not a proof. You misunderstood the story. What he did was, he told them, in the next many years, these are the years that will be leap years, not 3 years in a row. And when those leap years came, the Chachamim decided it will be a leap year, but it wasn't 3 years in a row. Tanrabanan says the Braita, you can't make a leap year on Shemitah, because you're going to extend the Yisur Melacha of the ground, which is a harsh thing for the farmers. Nor on Motzei Shvi'it, because people don't have that much produce on the 8th year, as the last year they weren't planting and working the ground. So therefore you want to not extend that year. When do you make a leap year? Erev Shvi'it, on the year before Shemitah, as Rashi explains, because then you extend the time that people could actually do work on the ground, it benefits people. However, the house of Rabbi Gamliel would even make a leap year on Motzei Shvi'it. Now, why did they hold that way? Because they said you could import food, so it's not going to be an issue. This is based on a machloket Tanaim. The Tanya mevi'in yerak mechutz la'aretz v'rabotenu hitiru. So the Tanakama says you're not allowed to bring produce from outside Israel, and the rabbis, Rabotenu, said it's allowed. What's the difference between them? Rabbi Yirmiyah, there is a tumah associated with the ground of chutz la'aretz, the dirt. So the issue is, if you bring the produce from outside, dirt will come along with it, and it will be metamet ta'arot, things that are meant to stay pure. Now Rabbi Gamliel wasn't worried about this, so import food. Tanakama was, and therefore you shouldn't make a shemitah, you shouldn't make a leap year in Motzei Shemitah. Tanu Abanan, final Braita. Says the Braita, You do not make a leap year if most of the people are tameh. As Rashi explains, if like the nasi dies and they're going to become tameh to his body, you don't make a leap year. And we'll clarify this as we continue. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ma'abrin, you do make a leap year. So Tanakama seems to say, since rov of them are tameh, you could do the korban Pesach with tum'ah. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you do make a leap year, and we'll see why. Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'aseh b'Chizkiah melech Yehuda. There was a story with Chizkiah, the king of Yehuda, when he took over, the majority of the people were tameh from Avodah Zarah. She'iberet Hashanah mipnei tum'ah, he made it into a leap year so they could become tahor for korban Pesach. Ubikish rachamim al atzmo. And then he prayed afterwards that he had made a mistake, because it says in the pasuk, Ki marbita amrabat me'Ephraim Menashe Yisachar v'Zvulun lo yitaharu. The majority of the people were tameh, turning to your bet and bet. Ki achlu et Pesach below kakatuv, and they ate the Pesach inappropriately, means he intercalated the year, which he should not have done. Ki itpalel Chizkiah aleim lemor Hashem atov yichaper ba'ad. He said, Hashem was good, forgive me for doing the wrong thing. So Rabbi Yehuda seems to be saying in this story that it was wrong to intercalate the year, because really it should have been done in its time, even in Tumah. Rabbi Shimon was the third shita. No, you're wrong, Rabbi Yehuda. If he intercalated the year because of the Tumah, it would have been effective intercalation, and there would have been an extra month. So what is he praying for? What was his mistake? Because the only time you're allowed to intercalate is if it's still Adar. It already had become Nisan, and he decided to intercalate the year, and that was a mistake. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, fourth opinion. Rabbi Shimon, he convinced people to keep Pesach Sheni instead of Pesach Rishon, and that was a mistake. We'll explain these shitot now as we continue. Amar Mar. Now Rabbi Yehuda in the Braita says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ma'abrin, that you would intercalate the year if the majority of people are tameh. Alma itlei Rabbi Yehuda tuma dechuya hi betzibur. We see clearly he holds tumah is just pushed off if the tzibur is tameh, most of them. Meaning it doesn't entirely allow korbanot to be brought in tumah, and if you have another option, you should do something else. And that's why I said you should push it off if most of the tzibur is tameh. The problem is, va'atanya, but the Braita teaches the opposite, because it says, tzitz, with the forehead plate of the Kohen Gadol, ben sheyeshno al metzcho, ben she'eno al metzcho. So Rabbi Shimon says, whether the Kohen Gadol is wearing it or not, miratzeh, it atones for korbanot that are brought in a state of tumah. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, odo al metzcho, miratzeh, ein odo al metzcho, eno miratzeh. It's only when he's wearing it that it atones. Rabbi Shimon said to Rabbi Yehuda, Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim yochiach. I'll bring a proof to you from the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, because he wasn't wearing she'enu al mitzcho, he wasn't wearing the golden garments, or meratzeh, and acted as an atonement for this avera. So Rabbi Yehuda said back, Hanach leYom Kippurim, leave aside Yom Kippur, shetumah hutra b'tzibur. It's only atoned for on Yom Kippur if you bring a korban in tumah, because that's a public offering, and there's a concept of tumah hutra b'tzibur, that when there's something associated with the tzibur, even tumah is negated. But the point is, it seems to be a contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda here says hutra, and in the Braita it seems like he holds dechuya. The Gemara says back, why are you asking a question from that Braita? Bring it from the Braita itself that we quoted above. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ma'abrin. Rabbi Yehuda first he says you push off the year, you add an extra month because of Tumah, which sounds like Dechuya. But then Rabbi Yehuda he quotes the story where Chizkiah made a leap year because people were Tameh, and he prayed, which seems to be, he was saying you should have done it the first time, which seems to be he holds Hutra. So in the Braita itself there's a contradiction. So we have to re-understand the Braita with an amending of the Braita. Tanakama says, you should not make a leap year because of Tum'ah, you should do it in its time. If they did, me'uberet, it is considered effective. So the Tanakama hold dechuya, and therefore if it's pushed off, it is effective. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's not effective. You can't push it off if people are tameh, because hutra, it's completely mutter. And that's the story of Chizkiah Melech Yehuda, clearly supports that. He says the Gemara, if you understand the machloket that way, Rabbi Shimon was the third opinion. He said, he said if what Chizkiah had done was pushing off the year, it would have been effective. Tanakama, so how's he different than Tanakama, Rabbi Shimon? The difference is lechatchila. Tani Amihachi, the Braita explains this. Tanakama says, even though I hold the chuya, you shouldn't push it off lechatchila, but if you do, it's still effective. Rabbi Shimon Omer Ma'abrin ela b'pnei ma bikesh rachamim al atzmo she'ein ma'abrin ela adar v'hu yiber nisan b'nisan. Rabbi Shimon argues, he says lechatchila he could have pushed it off. So what was the issue? The issue that he had done wrong is that he pushed it off after Nisan had arrived. Now let's analyze that. Amar Mar she'ein ma'abrin ela adar v'hu yiber nisan b'nisan. It seems to be, according to Rabbi Shimon, the avera that he had done was he pushed off the year, he added adar after Nisan had already begun. But the problem is, everybody knows that that's the halacha. How could he make such an elementary mistake? Does he not know the pasuk teaches us referring to Nisan? Nisan. You can't make a leap year after Nisan. So the Gemara answers, Shmuel made a mistake in the halacha of Shmuel. Tamar Shmuel, in ma'abrin et hashana b'yom 30 shel Adar, ho'il v'ra'ui lekov o Nisan. The 30th day of Adar, says Shmuel, is not allowed to be changed to being a leap year anymore, because it's possible for that day to be Rosh Chodesh, as the 30th day could really be the first day of Nisan. He thought we don't make such a gzeira, and therefore he intercalated the year on the 30th day of Adar. That was the mistake. The Braita explains this, and that was the error that Chizkiah had made. Let's go to the fourth and final opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Shimon mipnei sheisiat Yisrael la'asod Pesach Sheni. He said he convinced the Jews to make Pesach Sheni. So Gemara says, Hechidami. What was the case? What happened over here? What was the mistake that he made according to this fourth shita? So Amar Rav Ashi explains very interesting. Kigon shayu Yisrael mechtzat mei mechtzat taorim. What happened was like this. Half of the Jews were tameh and half were tahor. Now Rashi explains it wasn't actually half. The majority were tameh. But half of the men were tameh. The majority of the men were tameh. Now, the women, if you included them in the number, they were majority tahorim. So therefore, it would have come out the majority of the people as a whole, men and women, would be tahorim. So Me'ikarasav, originally he thought Nashim Barishon Chait Chova, that women are actually obligated in Korban Pesach, and therefore they should be included in this number. And since the majority of people are Tahor, then Tahavu Miutan Tmeim, only a minority are Tameh, or Miutan Midchu Pesach Sheni. So those minority have to be pushed off to Pesach Sheni. They can't do it in the first Pesach. But at the end he realized, Nashim Barishon Reshut, no, women are not mechuyev in Korban Pesach, it's just a voluntary thing for them. And therefore it comes out, only take the men into account for the number, which means that majority of people are tameh. And if that's the case, they should not have been pushed off to Pesach Sheni, they should have kept it in the first Pesach. That was the mistake that he had made, and that's why he was praying for forgiveness. We're going to stop here. Gufa. It's about 10, 12 lines from the bottom of Yud Bet and Yud Bet. Zrat Hashem will pick up this coming week with Yud Gimel and Yud Aleph. And I want to wish everybody a wonderful week, Shavua Tov, and we should only hear B'sarot Tovot. All the best.